the middle of the night. The Israeli Chief of Staff, Moshe Dayan, was present. So was the head of his office, who took these photos.
It was extremely exciting for us. It was like redemption. For many months after the arms deal, the Czech arms deal, we were very worried. We didn't know what will happen, because we knew that Nasser will attack us as soon as he's ready, and as long as Israel doesn't have a competing force.
The American president realized that he was not getting a complete picture of what was going on.
Eisenhower was concerned that there was collusion going on between the French and the Israelis. He said, "I'll G2 my friends if I have to." Now, G2 means intelligence, that he was going to use intelligence techniques to determine what was going on. And that was the use of the U-2.
The U-2 was the first spy plane to do what is commonplace now. It could photograph amazing details from a very high altitude. France's public posture was that they were only supplying Israel with 12 Mystères because of the arms embargo. But the U-2 revealed the truth.
Prior to this time, the Israelis just had a collection of old World War II aircraft. When we overflew them on the 29th of August, we found not only 60 Mystères. Looking down, all of a sudden, the Israelis had a strike air force. And the French had told Eisenhower that they were going to sell Israel 12 aircraft, 12 Mystères. When we saw 60, Eisenhower was livid.
Over the summer, the pressure on Eden had steadily built up. 2 conferences to find a peaceful solution had come and gone.
There was nothing but Suez, 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 morning, noon and night in number 10. We would go to Chequers, I suppose, for the weekend, but then Chequers is just an office in the country, so that's no rest at all. I think we once went to a play. I don't remember any relaxation otherwise.
The stress affected Eden. His health had been fragile ever since a botched gallbladder operation 3 years earlier.
I woke with pain just after 3:30 and took some pethidine. I never got back to sleep again.
I could see how many pill bottles there were. And so at that period, I don't think that he was taking anything he hadn't always been taking since his first operation.
Nasser, by contrast, felt considerably less stress.
The strange thing was that following the takeover of the canal and the threats which were made, his certainty about an attack began to decrease. The more time passed, the more he would say that no attack was going to happen.
At the annual party conference, Eden made it clear that he did not rule out the use of force.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, when Colonel Nasser seized the canal, we thought it our duty to take certain military steps in the eastern Mediterranean. The government has no intention of modifying or withdrawing from this decision.
But he was now running out of time. At some point soon, he was going to have to decide what to do with the large force he was assembling.
The operation either had to be stopped and disbanded, in which case the whole crisis would be over in a sense, but with a total triumph for Nasser. Or else it had to go forward.
But to go forward, Eden needed a pretext, and that was lacking.
Here he was with this personal declaration of war against Nasser, but no means of putting it into effect, because although Nasser had nationalized the Suez Canal Company, he hadn't given us any casus belli. He hadn't actually stopped a ship or arrested a British subject or shot anybody or done anything which would give us the opportunity to go in and invade. And this was frustrating Eden enormously.
The day after the party conference, an unexpected meeting at Chequers was to give Eden the pretext he wanted. This was decisive. The French had sent General Maurice Charles, their deputy chief of staff, to see Eden.
Charles unveiled this plan, which was a total surprise to us at the time.
What would be the reaction of Great Britain if Israel were to attack Egypt?
Well, that's a very difficult question. There's no need to take notes, Guy.
Guy Millard closed his notebook, but he remembers what followed.
We were aware that the French were in very close contact with the Israelis because they'd been supplying with aircraft and with training for their pilots on these aircraft and so on. We were not aware that their relations had gone so far that they'd actually been negotiating this kind of thing with the Israelis. So it was a total surprise.
I have a plan of action, Sir Anthony, for Britain and France to gain control of the Suez Canal. Supposing Israel should be invited to attack Egypt across the Sinai Peninsula, then France and Britain would order both sides to withdraw their forces from the Suez Canal, permitting an Anglo-French force to intervene. We occupy the canal on the pretext that we save it from damage by fighting, while actually seizing control of the entire waterway and all its ports.
Well, of course, I shall give these suggestions very careful consideration and convey my reactions to your government in a couple of days.
It was as if suddenly the heavens had opened, and here was the opportunity at last.
The French leaders were hugely relieved to hear Eden confirm that he accepted the Charles plan when he visited them.
Alors Charles a eu un grand mérite, c'est de convaincre.
Charles deserves credit for convincing Eden, to our surprise, as we thought he would cave in under American pressure.
Et à notre étonnement, parce qu'on pensait à la fin que Eden, devant la pression.
And I can tell you frankly that without the English, we would not have gone in.
Et je dois dire très franchement que sans les Anglais, nous n'aurions pas.
We were astonished when Eden said, "Yes, I want to take part."
À notre étonnement, Eden a dit, mais si, moi je veux en faire partie.
Eden was well aware that this must all be kept secret.
I remember him discussing with me what would happen if we informed the Americans of our talks with the French. And I said, well, quite obviously, they will oppose what is being suggested, and they will do their utmost to prevent us doing it.
The French now took the initiative. They persuaded their two allies, Britain and Israel, to sit down together with them and plan a war. The location they chose was a villa hidden away in the Paris suburb of Sèvres. Ben-Gurion and his most trusted advisors managed to leave secretly for France.
On our way to the airport, in the car there were the three of us, Ben-Gurion, Diane and myself. Diane put on a pair of glasses, and Ben-Gurion put on a hat of his head, which was so famous with, you know, the flowing white hair. And I was squeezed in the middle between the two of them.
The omens were not good. Ben-Gurion had very mixed memories from the time when the British ruled Palestine.
Ben-Gurion, at that time, didn't trust Great Britain. Eden was a little bit of an exception, being close to Churchill, but Ben-Gurion wasn't convinced that he's a man that can make decisions.
Eden sent his Foreign Secretary, Selwyn Lloyd, a man not always at ease with foreigners.
Nothing was to be known about this whole arrangement. And we were picked up there and taken to a villa at Sèvres, which was a center of the resistance during the war.
The Israelis had already arrived after a grueling 17-hour flight. Ben-Gurion looked ill, and another member of the delegation was asleep. When Selwyn Lloyd arrived, he was not impressed by what he found, and it showed.
Cold like ice. He wasn't a very charismatic, smiling gentleman, so it was a dry martini full of ice coming in and meeting a highly suspicious group of people.
Too aloof, too estranged. That's the way we saw him.
He tried to avoid us as much as he could. He didn't go into small talks like with the French.
The representatives sat arguing around the dining table from tea time till midnight. Ben-Gurion wanted the British and the French to attack the Egyptian airfields earlier. He was frightened that if the time gap between the Israeli invasion and the Anglo-French intervention was too long, the newly equipped Egyptian Air Force would flatten Tel Aviv.
Ben-Gurion stayed during the Blitz in 1940-41 in London and had a strong trauma from that period. And he was afraid that something like that might happen to Tel Aviv.
Ben-Gurion put considerable pressure on Selwyn to agree to advance the attack on the airfields by 72 hours. And at midnight, Selwyn could only say that he couldn't agree to that, and he would have to return to London.
The conference was now at breaking point.
He knocked with his fist on the table. And that was that. He was ready to quit because, a priori, he wasn't totally convinced.
Très tendu. On a pensé d'ailleurs que
very tense.
Finalement, tout cela
we thought finally that all this would lead to failure.
Par un échec généralisé.
Peres was desperate to stop Ben-Gurion leaving, so he arranged for their plane to have a mechanical fault.
Well, I told Ben-Gurion, you don't have a plane to fly back, so forget it.
The younger members of the Israeli delegation felt they needed cheering up, so they drove to this nightclub.
We were young guys. We wanted to see a famous French nightclub.
Beautiful one, very gallant. We were sitting in the lodge, watching it a little bit. I went down, I spoke with some of the girls.
But Peres and Diane were worried sick about the negotiations.
Sitting and watching the nightclub, our heart was somewhere else, as you can imagine. We were preoccupied all the time with it. And finally we lost our patience and went back to the hotel.
And I was very angry. I was a young man. I wanted to stay there, but of course I couldn't.
Following day, with the talks in abeyance, the French foreign minister flew to London to try and find a compromise.
Ce qui l'avait frappé, c'était le côté solennel.
What struck him initially was the solemn and cold nature of the meeting. He got the impression that he was in front of a sort of jury who were interrogating him. There were several cabinet ministers.